Hello, I'm Daniela. Welcome to part 1 of the Slow Stitching Tropical Leaf Workshop. In today's workshop, we'll create the basic structure of our leaf. We'll choose our supplies, create the basic silhouette, create the stem, and really start our stitching. This is a 3-part workshop, and I've broken it down into 3 parts to make it easier for you to follow along. I hope you enjoy this workshop. It's very simple, using just fabric and threads. And when we're done, we'll have a beautiful tropical leaf based on the Golden Pothos leaf. Now, I created a series on the Golden Pothos because I was so interested in it, with it growing in my garden. It's kind of hard to kill, which is very good for me, and it's just a beautiful leaf. Now, I always saw it as a houseplant, but down here in Florida, it grows outside, and I found that intriguing. And so therefore it started my love of this plant. So let's get started with this workshop and creating a replica out of fabric of these beautiful leaves. So here's our beautiful leaf that we're going to start making. This is going to be a multiple step process, and I'll break it down into short, fairly doable steps. I really love the way this came out. Now you could make this any shape and any size. I'm going to give you the basics, the heart shape, and then the stem, and you can alter it to fit your needs. Now, making a small one like this is also very doable. It is quicker to make, the shorter leaf, but it also is a little more finer detail. So it's really up to you. This large one is about 6 inches for the leaf at the longest point and 4 inches at the longest point. And this little one here is about 2 by 2. So to get started, we're just going to need basic supplies. I have a set of needles here. This is a sashiko needle, which I like because, as you can see, it has a large eye, and this is good for like 6 strands of floss, or even 4. I have a milliner's needle here. This is a long one. Again, it has a larger eye. And then I just have a small embroidery needle. And this is good because we're going to take these threads apart. So for these little eyes, when we use just 1 or 2 strands of embroidery floss, that little needle will come in handy. For my embroidery floss, I base it on the color fabric I have. I'm using a darker green fabric. It's just a cotton fabric, and I pressed it just to get rid of the wrinkles. I purchased this in a fat quarter, so it's a very inexpensive and easy way to find colors that you like. I'm using a solid color. You don't have to use a solid color. You can use a pattern. You can use any color for this project. It is a very artistic look. So really anything goes. If you wanted to make this all in muslin or neutrals or a pattern, it would be striking. I'll tell you my procedure and how I choose my colors, and then you could extrapolate from there for your own. I choose 5 colors. They're mostly in the green family, with the exception of this yellow. I choose a green that is very close to the color of my fabric. If it's not the exact color, and this one isn't, it's very close, and if anything, it's just a tad darker. And so that is going to be a really good one for adding texture, the outline, and whatnot. Then I just chose a beautiful green here, and I'll include all the numbers in the description, but just so that you have that information, this is a 561 from DMC. Then I have this brilliant green. I don't know how else to describe it. It's from Iris. I have an abundance of these. This happens to be a 967, but it's just a brilliant green. It's what I'd consider green if I needed to go and just purchase a green. I have this lighter yellowish green. Again, this is a DMC 907, and it's beautiful because it does have that yellow in it, and you can see how it pops up against this fabric that I chose. Now I have what I call a silvery green or an icy green. It might even look gold to you, depending on how the camera is picking it up. And this is a 3013, and it is beautiful. And I really like this because it looks just a hint of silver, and there's an incredible contrast with the green, but yet it still resembles green. This will be great for making variegation and highlights and whatnot. And then lastly, I have the yellow. Now the yellow is mostly for the stem, but I do stitch some veining with this yellow. This is a gorgeous, very light yellow. It doesn't have any orange in it. It doesn't really have a lot of blue in it. It's a 3078. You don't have to use these colors. These are just the colors that I'm using. And the last thing you need is something to back your fabric. I'm using batting because I love cotton batting. You can use felt. You can use a second sheet of fabric. Some people even use a dryer sheet, a used dryer sheet, so it doesn't have any detergent in it. You can have fusible batting as well, if that's easier for you to work with. Because this is just a simple shape, I don't find that I need this to be fused on. So that's pretty much it. Now for the purposes of the video, I'm using a chalk pencil because my fabric is dark and I want you to see the lines I'm making. But for this one, I didn't use a pencil at all. And the same thing here. I didn't use a pencil to cut out my shape or to make my lines, my veining. But you can do that if you want. And I'm doing it with a pencil because it's very easy to see and get the visual effect this way. The charcoal pencil, if any marks remain when I'm done sewing, I can just take a little water and kind of just work it off. So after you have your supplies gathered, and again I have a sharp pair of shears, you want to decide on how large or small to make your leaf. I'm going to make my leaf approximately the same size as that larger leaf. I think it just makes for a better demonstration. So to do that, I want to cut a rectangle of fabric larger than my leaf. So I'll just clip here and here. So this is going to be for my leaf, and this is quite large, much larger in fact than my sample leaf, but that's okay. I'm also going to take a strip of fabric from the end here, maybe 2 to 3 inches long and 4 to 6 inches wide. And this is going to be for my stem. You can make the stem any length that you want. I like to have a little excess material and then I can cut it down from size. Now the next thing I want to do is take my batting and cut it to the same size or even perhaps just a little bit smaller than the size I made for my leaf. So to do that, I just put my fabric on top of it, but a little off center, and I'll trim around. Doesn't have to be an exact cut. And then you can see my batting. Get rid of this piece. So then you can see I have my batting, my fabric. I like to just trim it down ever so slightly, particularly those raggedy ends. And I will have a little bit of fabric waste from doing it this way, but I don't mind that. I just feel a little bit better about creating that leaf nicely. So now I just want to trace the shape and the size of the leaf. Now if I wasn't filming this to show you, I probably wouldn't use this at all. So it's not necessary, but by all means, if you're at all concerned about getting the right shape, go ahead and just create your little shape. Now for this type of leaf, we're just creating a heart. It does not have to be perfect. In fact, imperfect is better. You could make a rounded bottom like I have here. You could make a little tuft of a bottom. These leaves kind of have all these different shapes. You can make this a perfect heart. The one thing that I do like to do though is not have the heart come to a point where I would normally sketch a heart and have it come to a point. I just make a little rounded part here. And now for my stem. I'm just going to set this piece aside and we'll use this later on. So now we're going to do two things. We're going to take our floss and stitch around that heart. I'm going to use a very small stitch. I'm going to take the thread that is closest to or slightly darker than my fabric, and I'm going to stitch around, and I'll show you that in a moment. And then we're going to roll up our stem. I'm going to set this fabric aside for the stem. We're just going to work on stitching the silhouette of our leaf. Now this is a Golden Pothos, and so this is why we want this shape. We're trying to capture that. So now I'm just going to cut my floss to about 18 inches. That's the length I like to work with. And then I'm going to take the ends and just tap it. I just want to get one strand of this floss. So I tap it, I grab one strand, and I pull just one strand out, and then I have 5 strands remaining. I'll set this piece aside, and I'm going to take my small needle here, my little embroidery needle, thread my needle. So now I've threaded my needle with my one strand of floss, and I made a knot in the end. You can start anywhere on your leaf. I'm just going to start right on the outside here, on that pencil mark that I made, and I'm going to make very small stitches. You can use any type of stitch you want. I'm just going to use a straight stitch, maybe even a running stitch. But my point being, I want it to be very small. And as you can see, the color is close enough to that fabric that it just disappears in that fabric. And it's quite lovely and beautiful. So I'm going to stitch all the way around, just following that guide that I made. If you didn't make the guide, just stitch around the heart shape. So I've stitched all around my heart with just little small stitches, as you can see here. So I'm quite pleased with the way that came out. Now let me show you it on the back. You could see all my stitches around the heart. My batting moved around a little bit. It's a little off kilter, but that's okay because I have 99.9% of the heart stitched effectively. So now I'm ready to just make my cuts. I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to eyeball maybe 1/4 inch to 1/8 of an inch around the stitches that I made. And I'm just going to snip all the way around, removing that fabric. So what will be left will be that heart. I could just take my time. I like to cut just gently into shapes. Sometimes I'll cut right off the piece like that, and then I'll just come back in and go around the shape. You can always come back in and trim off more, so just be careful that you do not cut your stitches. So there I have my leaf. Now I had to rethread my needle just to finish that stitch. So I have the 561 again, just wrapped it around this little bobbin here, and I taped the number just so that I knew exactly what color I was using. I knotted my thread again and it's ready to go. So now I'm ready for the second part of today's lesson, which is to make that stem. Now you can make the stem any length. I have it about 4.5 to 5 inches here. That's the length I'm going to use. You can make it shorter or longer. I like to have my stem meet up at least 1/3 or 1/2 down from the top of my leaf. Now to do that, I have cut about 2.5 to 3 inches of width here. What I want to do is use that thread to start to make that stem. So I'll set the heart aside for now and just work on the stem. What I like to do is just fold a little lip on the stem, not very much, somewhere just beneath 1/4 of an inch. And I'm just going to roll it a couple of times. And that's going to be my stem. Now I have extra fabric here, so I realize I don't need all that fabric. You can see all the wrinkles from what the fabric I do need, so I'm just going to trim off a little bit, maybe 1 inch. This isn't an exact process, but I know that if I have too little fabric, it's very difficult to make this stem. So I want to make sure I have more fabric than I need. I'm going to work on one particular side of this stem because this part we're going to leave flat. So I'm going to really just roll it up again, trying to keep it fairly tight. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it can be flat. It doesn't have to be rounded. And when I have one end done successfully, I'm going to take my thread, and again this is 1 strand of floss, and I'm just going to come in here and secure this little piece here, this little ending. I'm just going to make a couple of stitches going through all the fabric, and then once I have that end secured, I'm just going to wrap around a couple of times the thread around the entire piece, and then I'll go through that fabric again. And I'll just pull it snug, and that will hold it shut. And now I'm going to continue to work my way down this stem. The fabric will roll, and I want to just keep it going. So once I work about 1 inch at a time, I'm going to just come back up through all the layers of fabric and go back down another stitch or 2, and then go back up and back down. Now as you can see, the edge of my fabric here, the bottom layer, is exposed, and that's okay. I'm going to again work it just a little bit further down, continuing those stitches. And then I'll wrap it around again just a couple times. This just helps keep it closed. come up from the bottom, and again, continue all the way down. Now it's okay if it gets thicker. I'm going to try and keep it approximately the same width, but if it gets a little thicker, that's okay. So as you can see, this is what I'm left with. I'm going to come over here, start to roll it on the inside again, and on the outside, hold it closed, make a couple of more little stitches. Wrap it around again, stitch it closed, and I'll probably do this one more time. Do one more stitch here, wrap it around a couple of times, stitch through, and now I'm going to stitch through one more time so that my needle ends on the bottom. And now as you can see, I have this piece here that if I open it up, I can make it nice and flat. And that's the look that I want. I can trim this down further, but I'm going to leave it just like this. If there's any loose threads, either coming from the fabric, as long as they're not my sewing threads, I don't want to cut them, but if they're just coming from the fabric, like fraying, then I can just trim that off. So now I just want to make a light little thread here to hold it onto my leaf. You can neaten this up if you don't like it to be as spread out as the entire length of your fabric. And I think I'm going to just roll it a little bit so it's flat, no exposed seams. So I'll just make sure each part is rolled. And I like to go down 1/3 to 1/2 of the way from the top of where that heart is. So again, I can just play around with it. The important thing to do is to make sure it lays flat. Now once I have it in the position that I want, I'm going to take a pin and pin it down to hold it in place. I still have my thread attached to my stem, coming out the bottom of the stem. I want to take a little spot beneath the top of this heart, maybe just 1/8 of an inch beneath the stitching that I made, and anchor it down. And so now when I pull my stem, it's anchored down. I'm going to hold my stem down flat and come up through my heart and my stem. And now I'm going to make a line of straight stitches down that stem right to that pin. If you need to add more thread to your needle, go ahead and do that. Knot off your needle and thread, rethread your needle, and go down. And if you have enough on your needle like I do, just continue to stitch. Now once I get to the head of that pin, I'm going to stitch right up to the head of that pin, so my needle and thread are on the bottom, pull out that pin and hold it with my thumb. And I'm going to continue to stitch all the way down the length of this stem. This is kind of a bit of a basting stitch, but it's also anchoring it in position very well. And that's the look that we want. Right now the sides are loose. It's just anchoring it right down the center. And that is totally okay. And you can go whatever length you want down your leaf. I like it this way because it's going to start to help us create that veining. Now once I have this stem stitched down right to the edge, I'm going to come up on one side, make sure my fabric is all tucked, and I'm just going to make a few little stitches, maybe 4 or 5, and they're going to be rather small on the one side to hold those edges in place. So I have 3 right now. I'll do 2 more, and then I'll do the same thing on the other side. I don't need it so much up here because it's thin, but you can always continue up the length of your stem if you want. And then I'm just going to stitch down. So I'll do my 5 little stitches. If you need another stitch just to hold it in place, take that other stitch. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it does not have to be symmetrical. If you look at some of these Golden Pothos leaves, they really aren't symmetrical, but they are beautiful. So now I'm going to flip my leaf over, go to a nearest stitch, or at least a stitch close by, and knot my needle and thread just a couple of times. And so that's where we're going to stop for today. When we come back in our next video, we're going to work on the stem and start our veining. So that's part 1 of the workshop. It's a beautiful leaf and we have the beginnings started. In the next video, we'll start adding some stitching and work on that stem. I hope you'll join me for part 2. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. All the links for this series will be included down below, as well as my inspirational video. Thanks for joining me today.